Hello, welcome back to the Matt Phifer Experience. I am your host, Matthew Phifer, and we have on a very special guest. We have on Sandra Radna from the law offices of Sandra and Radna PC in Long Island, New York. So thank you very much, Sandra, for joining us. And so we have a very special show for you today. I think it's very common for people to struggle with co-parenting, but one of the things that's not talked about enough is that when you're struggling with co-parenting, especially in that high conflict divorce, post-divorce, or separation, those things tend to escalate around the holidays. So we're going to break that down quite a bit. But before we get into that, let me introduce you to our guest, Sandra. Thank you so much for joining the Matt Phifer Experience. I'm going to kick it over to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and definitely tell us a little bit about your book that you wrote. You're getting divorced. Now what? So you are someone like myself who stays busy and puts out some great content for people to digest, and things that they can work on their own. So tell us a little bit about yourself and about the book as well.
Well, Matt, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be on this show. I've been listening to it, and I think you do a great job bringing really important issues to the forefront for people so that they can learn. And that's what I like to do also. I like people to get information, because we always feel nervous if we don't have information. If we're empowered with information, we feel like we can handle it. And divorce is an extremely emotional and trying experience, especially in the case of a high conflict divorce or litigated divorce, meaning that you're going to court. If you're going to court, that means you're not agreeing about things. And when you're talking about your children, you're talking about your money. I don't know anything that's more personal and more emotional than those topics. Whether you're a person that is the one that has the money, you're worried about not having any money by the time this is over. And if you're the person that doesn't have as much money as the other spouse, you're worried about, am I going to have enough money to live on? And then you're worrying about the safety of your children, and we can go on and on and on. So it's extremely emotional. Thank you for mentioning my book. I did write the book to help people. It's told through stories of my clients. Their names were changed, of course, but I discuss everything from how to pick an attorney to what happens if you have a spouse with mental illness or addictive problems, substance abuse issues. What should be in your divorce agreement? How do you make sure that's enforceable? How do you tell the children? How do you plan for your divorce? I have forms that people can fill out, so it helps them to plan. So it's a very practical book, and my readers have told me that it's been extremely helpful, even just strategies of dealing with a spouse that's extremely difficult to deal with, which is what we're going to talk about today, because the holidays, we just had Halloween, and I had a lot of calls from my clients about everything that was happening on Halloween. So it's really difficult. Things that people that are not in a high conflict situation really take for granted can become huge issues for people that are in a high conflict situation. And nobody wants to be there, but unfortunately they find themselves there, and we're trying to protect the kids.
Yeah. And one of the things I want to bring up, because I think it's more on the rare end of the spectrum, even though we've had a lot of attorneys on here. You do talk very openly about domestic violence and domestic abuse within the family. Oftentimes we've seen, and this is the reason why we choose our lawyers very carefully on the show. I've seen and I've heard, and lawyers that tend to downplay it, even to a point of victim shaming. I've shared on this podcast before. There was someone who I was working with that their lawyer literally, and this was an extreme domestic violence situation where they told them, well, you know exactly what to say to schmooze him over, just have a conversation with them and just see. And to a point where, I had to tell my client, not only is this extremely dangerous for you, because there's weapons involved and that sort of thing, but the attorney is basically asking you to do the job that you've paid him to do. So talk a little bit about that. When you talk about in your book how to choose an attorney for someone who might be coming out of one of those dangerous situations, how do you choose an attorney that isn't going to re-traumatize you and is going to listen to some of these dangerous situations that you might be coming out?
That's such a great question, because I think that when people are going through a divorce, they haven't gone through something like this before, they're really not sure what to do. They're not sure how the lawyer is supposed to behave. So they kind of take a lot and say, okay, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. And this is, I guess, the way it's supposed to be. And they could end up in a situation that is very dangerous, to your point. So one of the things I talk about in my book is that I actually give a checklist of what you should be doing when you contact an attorney, even that first phone call. How do they treat you? Is their staff kind to you on the phone? Does the attorney listen to you without interruption? Do they let you tell their story, or are they interrupting you and rushing you through the whole thing? You should have an in-person meeting with that attorney prior to hiring them. And when you have that in-person meeting with them, talk to them about your issues. Do they have solutions? Do they seem knowledgeable about it? Do they know the judges and the people that are involved in your venue where the case is being held? Have they handled this type of case before? What advice are they giving you? You should be able to tell during that meeting if they're confident and if they have handled situations before. And just by the types of things they're saying to you, just like anything else, you'll know if they know what they're talking about and if they don't. And this is your life. You need someone who's experienced in your specific issues. So there's so many attorneys, and some attorneys are more experienced in mediation. Some attorneys are more experienced in something called collaborative divorce. Some attorneys are more experienced in cases with domestic violence. Some attorneys are more experienced in all different types of things with divorce. Well, your situation is unique to you, and you need an attorney that's going to be able to speak clearly to those issues and be a strong advocate for you when you go to court. And if you're not getting the vibe when you go there, you have to choose somebody else. And here's the other important thing. If you have an attorney, like the situation you were just explaining, that is not advocating for you, does not seem to be able to do what you need them to do, you could always switch attorneys. There is nothing wrong with that. And I think people don't realize that. Sometimes they don't realize it till it's too late. And if you're not feeling that that person is adequately representing you, whatever reason, you have the absolute right to switch attorneys and get somebody who is more aligned with what your objectives are and can help you achieve those objectives.
You headed right into the direction that I was just about to ask about, because it's something that I've advocated to people before. Is I tell people, don't forget that your attorney works for you, not the other way around. Now, of course, we shouldn't attorney hop or anything like that. I think there's a course of action that needs, conversation that needs to be had before we get to that point. Oftentimes, sometimes things are just 100% deal breaker regardless. But can you talk a little bit about that process of what it's like? One of the questions that I get quite often is, do I get my retainer back? Is that something that is owed? What if we're in the middle of my case? What if we're headed to trial or litigation, next week? What does that process look like? And does that slow up the divorce process? What does that look for someone who might be in the middle of that?
Okay, I'm going to just break down the questions that you asked, because I think they're excellent questions and important to address each part. So the first part is, if I switch attorneys, do I get any of my money back? And the answer is, it depends. In New York, at least, the way attorneys are paid is on an hourly basis for a litigated divorce, because you can't predict how long the divorce is going to take. Typically, the attorney will take a retainer up front and then work from that retainer. So the hourly is subtracted from that upfront retainer. If at the time you're switching attorneys, all that money has not been used, the remainder of the money is required to be refunded to the client. That's just part of their retainer agreement, and the retainer agreement is regulated by New York state law. So that's that story. Now, sometimes there's a situation that the client actually owes money to the attorney, and they will not release whatever the information is in their file until they get paid to switch attorneys. So that's usually something that does have to be taken care of. If the client's about to go to trial, that is not a good time to switch attorneys, because it's very difficult for an attorney to get up to speed at that point, a new attorney. Also, the new attorney it's very difficult for them to undo anything that was done during the trial. Discovery is closed. They can't get additional information. So you're really at a disadvantage if you wait till that point. So really, it's up to the client, who's really a consumer of the attorney, right? To really be paying attention, see how things are going, and if they feel that it's not going well, try to switch sooner rather than later. And I understand that sometimes you're trying to give the person a chance, but before you get to the point that you're already at trial, that's really when you should be switching, because otherwise it's very difficult, and the new attorney can't really switch what's already been done.
I know this. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how often this happens, but I've heard of it also being the other way around. Are there things that could cause a cause attorney to let go of a client?
Absolutely. So an attorney is an advisor. Our whole job is to give advice to our clients. If we have a client that is not taking our advice, that doesn't want to do things the way that we're suggesting, that, for example, if we tell the client that in New York, the court does not look favorably if you talk to the children about what's going on in the court case. It's not good for the children. They don't want you to do that. And the client continues to talk to them about the court case, or the client continues to ignore court orders, or the client does not follow your advice about any of a myriad of things involving their case. Well, that becomes very difficult to work with that client. If you're preparing a client for trial and you're saying this is the information we need to prove, and the client says, no, I don't want to do that, or I don't want to talk about this, or, well, then it's very difficult for the attorney to do their job, because the attorney has experience on what we need to do in order to achieve the client's objectives. So the client's not a lawyer. The client knows, this is what I want at the end. I want custody. I want the house. I want 50% of this asset, financial asset. So the attorney knows what they have to do in order to get there. If the client's not allowing the attorney to do that, whether that's doing discovery or subpoenaing records or doing depositions or whatever needs to be done, or even disclosing their own finances. Maybe they want the other person to disclose finances, but they don't want to disclose their own. Then it's very difficult for the attorney to represent that person. And that could be a reason that it doesn't work.
What are some common misconceptions that you would say happen in with divorces, whether it be high conflict or mediation or pretty much any aspect of it? What would you say are some common misconceptions that might be out there?
I think the most common misconception is that a person thinks that if I'm a good person, and if I can show that I was the PTA mom and I'm the one that took my kids to everything, and my husband was a dirtbag, he was never there, and he was, you name it, whatever it is, that they're automatically the judge is going to see that she's a good person, he's a bad person, or vice versa. That's the most common misconception. And the truth is that the court puts everyone on an even playing field. Everybody starts off the same, and until they're proven otherwise. So throughout the case, you can prove it. You have to chip away and prove your case, but it's extremely frustrating, and it's a very long process. And my clients sometimes say, why does it take so long? Why do we have to do this way? Why can't they see my spouse as a rotten person? Why do I have to prove all of this stuff? Isn't it plain to see that I'm the good one and they're the bad one? And yes, to me, it might be plain to see based on what the client told me, but the court, the judge, is not allowed to make a decision without evidence. And that evidence is provided to the court through motions, which is time consuming. They take time to make these decisions. It's through trial. It's through hearings, which is like a trial, but maybe on just one issue, like who gets to live in the house. And the whole process is expensive. It's time consuming. And the clients sometimes don't understand that, because they think, well, why would this be difficult? Anybody could see I'm the good one and they're the bad one. And that especially comes true when the other spouse has substance abuse issues, mental illness, or a history of physical or emotional abuse. They think that should be clear, and it's still not clear. We still have to prove the case, They will ultimately win if we have all the evidence that backs up everything that they say, but it's not a slam dunk. It's not an immediate thing that as soon as you go in, unless obviously there's some terrible abuse and you start with that and the court can clearly see that and there's police proof and hospital records, that's completely different. But if it's just more subtle than that, not as clear as that, we have to prove it. And that is extremely frustrating and surprising to clients.
I think one of the things I tell people all the time is that we can't forget that as bad of a person as they are, they still have rights. And with those rights, that means they have, they can try to prove their innocence, and they don't have to be a perfect person. So, sometimes those lines, unfortunately, are very gray when it comes to when you're in court. And it's also, especially as a parent, most courts are very reluctant to completely violate people's rights when it comes to them as a father or as a mother. And so that's, I think that is one of those misconceptions that people just think that because I'm a good person, because they're a bad person, then like you said, it's just going to be clear as day of which person is going to get full custody.
Right. You hit the nail right on the head, because the view of the court is that a child deserves to have the benefit of both parents, unless one of the parents is really not safe for that child. And that's a really important thing, because no matter how much one spouse hates the other one, that child is half of that person. Mm-hmm. They have them in it, and children don't want to be cut off from somebody forever. Now, parents, we can go into a whole thing about one parent maybe turning the child away from being, looking favorably on that parent. People don't like the word alienation, but that is something that is discussed. And so unless somebody's not safe, they really have the benefit. They should have the benefit of both parents. They should have the love of both parents, and they shouldn't feel guilty for loving both parents, even if that parent did something that the one parent.
One of the things you brought up a very hot topic, and we don't avoid hot topics here. I know there's going to be some people who feel very awkward about the conversation or whatever. And as you guys are listening, you're welcome to, air your opinion in the comment section and that sort of thing. But alienation, parental alienation, has become a very, very hot topic, to a point where I know some people won't even discuss it online anymore. But when we're talking about divorce, we almost have to, because we have a certain sector that, let's say it's junk science, that it doesn't exist, and then we have another place that feels that not only does it exist, but it happens pretty frequently, and that the behavior is still there, regardless of it being quote unquote disproved. What does that look like, and how does that dynamic play out in court, where the decisions are actually made? And, what does that look like for you, for your clients, and when someone's arguing the point on one side or the other?
Well, it's a very good question. It is a hot topic discussion. And the reason it's a hot topic discussion, rightly so, is because in many family court cases, the parent who's saying that something is going wrong is accused of alienating the children away from the other parent. And really what the parent's trying to do is keep the children safe. And the frustration is a lot of judges, a lot of attorneys for the children are not adequately trained to recognize the signs of the abuse that the parent is worried about. So the parent who's trying to keep the child safe is made to be the bad guy. They're called an alienator. And that's where the controversy, where everybody's saying that we shouldn't use that term anymore. But the fact is, if one parent is disparaging another parent, if one parent is talking about the other parent, it is so easy to influence children. And it could be something as simple as, well, I would get that for you, but your dad doesn't give us enough money, and I can't do it. Or, I would get that for you, but because I have to give your mom so much money, I can't do that anymore. And those things, even if you just say it in passing, well, I didn't really say anything bad. I was just saying we don't have money. Like, what can I say? It's not as egregious as saying mom is a terrible person or dad is a terrible person, but those things influence a child. I know that you love your father, but you don't know what he did to me. And I'll never be the same because of what happened. Well, a child's going to be influenced by that. And what happens is, and it really depends, and I break this down in my book, because depending on the age of the child is how they're going to be influenced and how they're going to react. So a younger child might parrot what a parent said. They might say, I had one father that I was representing, and the kid who was 2.5 years old or 3 years old came out of the car and said, give mommy money, because that's what mom was saying to him. Teenagers do not want to get caught in the middle. They shut down. They don't want to be in the middle of their parents' stuff. They don't want to hear it. And to avoid conflict, might align more with one parent, the one that's maybe more vocal, just because they don't want to have a problem anymore. And then adult children, they don't want to be involved either. They might just take a side, and just, they're already older. They decide that mom's right. They decide dad's right. And the other parent's just completely cut off, and they're adults. And the parent is sitting there saying, wait, you were here your whole life. Like, that I didn't do these things. Why are you doing that? So it's real. It happens all the time. The label is what people have a problem with because of the mostly women who have been labeled as alienators when all they were trying to do is keep their children safe, and they feel like, does my child have to be killed in order for anybody to pay attention? Do they have to be severely injured for anyone to pay attention? And unfortunately, the way our system is set up, that's almost what has to happen. Mm-hmm. If you say, this is what I think is going to happen because of the behavior, the court's like, well, it hasn't happened yet. Mm-hmm. And then when something happens, they're like, okay, it only happened this one time. So it's just, but I'm still going to let them see him. And that is a very frustrating situation for a parent to be in, because you're concerned for the safety of your child. And if the child says it, then they say, well, the parent's making, the child say that something's going on. So it's a very, very difficult situation. The way that an attorney helps with that is that you get an attorney appointed for the children early on. And it's really up to the attorney to be a strong advocate and explain what's going on in a way that's not off-putting. To talk to their clients and say, this is how the court will accept that you're saying. This is how we can do it. And sometimes it's all in the presentation. I'm not saying that there's a fail-proof, foolproof magical formula, but a lot of it is how it's presented to the court, the way it's presented, the way your attorney advocates for you, the way that you give your information. That can make all the difference. But it's a very difficult, complicated area to navigate.
I can only imagine. I imagine it's different in every state with the laws being different as well. And so, yeah, I don't wish that on anyone, because that's just a difficult dynamic, I imagine. And I remember it being even more difficult when everything was online, and so, because even though I can't speak for you, but I know in some situations people would be accused that they were in the background while they were on Zoom and, coercing the child that way, whether it was true or not true. And it was very difficult to disprove as well. So, but I wanted to take that one step further with the holidays coming up, because now a lot of people who may have experienced that in courtroom and litigation now are actually co-parenting, and all of these type of things seem to exasperate themselves around the holiday season, whether it be because someone is trying to punish the other person for leaving, especially that very first year. The controlling partner, the person who was the abusive person in the relationship, may use this as time to send out threats. I'm going to take full custody of the child if you're dating again, if we don't spend time as a family, all of those type of things. Or the reverse of it, they have the child and they're threatening not to return it. Can you talk a little bit about all of the dynamics when it comes to custody around the holiday season, and maybe some things that you may have talked about in your book?
Most important thing is to have an agreement that's as detailed as possible and anticipates all the difficulties that you have. So let's talk about Thanksgiving. That's coming right up. Some agreements will have that the parties are sharing the day. One party's going to have dinner, the other party's going to have dessert. They split the day. That might not work in every family. Some families, they alternate the holidays. One year, in odd years, one parent gets them, and even years, the other parent gets them. Other people want to have the whole weekend. If they get Thanksgiving, they get Thursday through Sunday for that whole weekend. The point is that your agreement has to be specific to what your family does. For example, let's take Christmas. Some families, Christmas Eve is the big holiday. Some families, Christmas Day is the big holiday. Well, if it is that situation in your family, then one parent can get Christmas Eve every year and the other parent can get Christmas Day every year. Mm-hmm. If it's not in the agreement, and you can't anticipate every single possible thing that needs to be in the agreement, but you want to try to make it as detailed as possible so that you avoid conflict. The more detail you have, the more specific it is, the easier it is for the court to enforce. If your agreement is silent about something, meaning that it doesn't mention it, it's harder for the court to enforce. Or if it's too general, it's harder for the court to enforce. So when you come to the holidays, if you can say, for example, Christmas Day starting at 10 o'clock, ending at whatever time, instead of just saying Christmas Day, and they could say, well, it's still Christmas Day, even though it's 4 o'clock. Mm-hmm. It's still Christmas Day, even though it's 6 o'clock. Well, the agreement doesn't say what time you get them, and I'm going to have them now. It puts the kids in a difficult situation. It puts the parents in a difficult situation. It's uncomfortable for everybody. Some people say that if they do the odd and even year for Thanksgiving, for example, they might celebrate their own Thanksgiving. Their family will just always celebrate it on Wednesday instead of Thursday, so that they could still have a Thanksgiving meal every year with the children. So you have to know what you're comfortable with, what you need to do, what's likely to have. If you have a big extended family and there's going to be a lot of graduations and weddings and activities and birthdays, and you want the child to go that, you want to put in the agreement that there are going to be occasions coming up, or if a child plays sports, that both parents have to take them. We've had situations when they said, well, you could take them to the sport on your time, on my time, they're not going. Well, that's not fair to the kid. What are they going to tell their coach? I can't go to practice. It's my dad's day, or, it's just, it becomes difficult. So with the kids with sports, we put very specific things in about competition, if they're traveling, what parent does the traveling, who's paying for it, what's happening with uniforms, what happens with the other kids, all different things. Who's watching the kids? Does it have to be the other parent? All of these things have to be as detailed as possible, and you still won't get every single thing. But if you can get as much as possible, and a mechanism for deciding the things that are not included, that's going to be helpful.
Well, talk a little bit about, you brought up if one parent is dating someone. Talk about that, because that raises a lot of problems and arguments. People become very demanding about meeting that new person. Do you typically advocate for people to have some sort of agreement that they meet the person? I've seen even when there is an agreement like that written into the document, that a lot of people don't even abide by it. They just say, well, this is just my friend. So the question is it even enforceable at that point? What do you say about introducing the new person, and when your ex is introducing their new person?
That's a question that really depends on the age of the children, what the court's going to do. Younger children, they'll usually say no one gets introduced until the divorce is done. But it's really hard to regulate that. People continue to do it. It's confusing for the children. If they have another parent and they see like a boyfriend or girlfriend being introduced, and some kids, it might not be a big deal at all. You have to know your kids. So it's very hard. It's really a case-by-case basis. Generally speaking, it's best to wait until it's a serious person, so the child doesn't have so many people in and out of their lives. You have to know about that person to make sure they're not a dangerous person, that they're not a predator, that you're having your child around. Those are all the reasons. I don't really put in agreements that one parent has to meet the other person before the child introduces them. That's so burdensome, and it's really none of their business. You should be able to move on with your life and date who you want. But you could put things in the agreement that they can't stay over a significant other's house until it's a serious relationship. I've made things specific depending on what's going on, but I don't think there's a hard and fast rule. I think it depends on the situation and the context of that particular family.
Something I haven't heard a lot of recently has been the first right of refusal. Is that something that a lot of attorneys are moving away from? Does it work? Is it something that you would advocate for?
Attorneys for the children are trying to stay away from that. It's very hard to enforce. So people will say, well, if the person's going to be gone more than 4 hours, I get the right of first refusal and they have to come with me. And so what if somebody's watching the clock? It's 3 hours and 58 minutes, it's going to be my time in 2 minutes. It's just too difficult. If we are doing right of first refusal for younger children, we're saying if the person's going to be gone for more than 24 hours, then they should be with a parent instead of with a babysitter. Yeah. So we'll do that. But if they're running out to the store, if they're going to be gone for a few hours, if they have to run to work for a little bit and a grandparent is taking care of them or another family member, the child shouldn't have to leave. They're usually very comfortable with the other family members anyway. Maybe they're with their cousins. It's okay. It's not the end of the world. So we are trying to make agreements not be encouraging conflict, which the right of first refusal does, because people are watching and saying, they were supposed to be with me. I have the right of first refusal. They were gone for more than 2 hours. Well, that becomes extremely difficult.
The other thing I notice is that, especially in a high conflict, it's one way for someone who may have been problematic and controlling to keep control, even though you're divorced, because now they can ask where you're going, how long you're going to be gone. And it's like they have too much information. It's almost, I can make an argument that it's almost worse than actually being married to that person, because you still have to tell them your whereabouts and that sort of thing. I've never really cared for that rule, especially for someone who's coming out of a domestic violence situation.
Right. I agree with you. It just becomes so much more difficult. And the reason that you're getting divorced is to have peace in your life and to not have someone having control and to have that much control. One of the things that is in every agreement is a non-interference clause so that people can live their lives and not have to have interference. The only thing that they should have to disclose is if they're traveling with the child, not where they're going, but if the child is traveling with them, where's that child going to be? Well, that's reasonable. You want to know where your child's going to be. You want to have an itinerary for that. You want to be able to get in touch with them. It used to be that you wanted to know the hotel phone number, but now it's cell phones. It's not even necessary, but they should know if they're going to be on an island someplace at a hotel, you should know where they are. And they should be able to contact the child through a cell phone or with FaceTime or whatever. So other than that, they don't have any right, in my opinion, to know what the spouse is doing. If they're going out, if they're not with the child, they do have a right to know who's taking care of the child. If they're not home, that's reasonable. But again, if they're going to be taking care of daycare and they know that it's going to be the grandma or a babysitter, they don't have to know every single second, well, who's there now, or who's in the hotel room, or who's going on the vacation, or people get too controlling, and it's very frustrating and not necessary. The child just has to be safe, and the parent has to be trusted to keep the child safe, and that should be the end of the story.
Sandra, you are an absolute wealth of knowledge, and I can't wait to get my hands on this book, and I definitely want to get it in the hands of people who are listening and people who follow me. For those of you who are listening, don't forget it is called You're Getting Divorced, Now What? And I love the title. Obviously, everything about the book, really resonates with everything that we talk about here on my platform. Can you tell people where they can find you at if they want to connect with you, or if maybe they're going through a divorce, or they're looking for an attorney out in New York? Where can they find you at? Where can they find more information on you?
I think the easiest thing is to go to my website, which is radnalaw.com, RADNALAW.com. Everything's there. If they want to get the book, easy, go to Amazon, which is where we get everything, right? Is Amazon. and I only wrote one book. So if you look up my name, Sandra Radna, Radna, you'll find the book. It's called You're Getting Divorced Now What? And it's you can get it like as a Kindle version, or I'm sure it's at barnesandnoble.com also, any place that you can get online books. But the hard copy is nice too, so you could dog ear the pages that you're interested in.
Yeah. And,
but thank you so much. Excuse me?
What about social media platforms?
Social media, I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. You could find me all of those places.
Awesome.
LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn as well.
So if you're listening, we'll make sure that we have all of her information and everything in the show notes. And so, Sandra, thank you very much. For those of you who are listening, make sure you guys go to the comment section. Make sure you guys let Sandra know how much you have enjoyed having her on here. Also, let us know something that maybe you've taken away, something that you may have learned that you didn't know before. And then also make sure you guys go over to Instagram and all of her other social media platforms. Give her a follow. Make sure you guys share things out. As you guys know here, we like sharing out people who are doing a good job, who are taking care of people who are taking care of us. And Sandra definitely fits that bill. So thank you guys.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Matt.
See you on the next episode.
Bye, everybody.
One second, Sandra.